Recent response to protests in Gaza when 60 people were shot, dead, and when thousands of people were injured. Many Irish people were outraged by that. They felt it was an excessive use of force, of live ammunition on a crowd that yes, was very difficult to manage. Yes, there was some violence involved in that protest, but many of the people who were shot were unarmed, and many of them were not close to the border, and that was something that outraged many people, including Irish people.
There were calls in the Irish Parliament to expel the Israeli ambassador from Dublin.
I have not expelled an Israeli ambassador. I have not introduced boycotts on settlement goods, which people have called for in Ireland. I have not immediately recognised the state of Palestine, as people have called for, although in our programme for government, in the Irish government, we would like to recognise the state of Palestine, but in the context of a negotiated two-state solution.
So no, not yet.
So we want to see progress on a peace process that can result in two neighbouring countries living in peace together, Palestinians and Israelis. That's something we believe is possible, and it's something that I'm here for the third time in less than a year to advocate for. So we are a country that is trying to bring people together, to talk sense, to try to find political solutions rather than solely security solutions to problems that have been here for decades.
What do you know about,
and are resulting in young Palestinians being killed and Israelis also being threatened. And neither of those things are acceptable. I have always said that Israel has the right to defend itself, and it will always do that. Any country has a responsibility to ensure that when they are trying to manage protests, even in dangerous and difficult situations like we have seen on the Gaza border, that they operate with restraint. Using live ammunition on a crowd is a serious issue. What we have said is that we would like to see an international and independent investigation into what happened, why it happened, whether or not that was the appropriate response in terms of defence. And we don't think that that's an unreasonable call. We need to see a new political initiative that can see a negotiated solution that can provide the kind of permanent, I hope, security that the international community wants, that I believe can make Israel safer and more prosperous, and also Palestinians. It can give them the opportunity to develop their own independent country, which is what I believe they deserve. I have been very critical and publicly critical of Hamas in the context of rockets being fired from the Gaza Strip into Israel. That is totally unacceptable, and it should be condemned. And there needs to be, obviously, a defensive response from Israel when that happens. But what I am saying is we need to look at the causes of radicalization in the Gaza Strip.
In your parliament, I don't know in which part of the parliament, there are calls which are considered to be anti-Semitic, not anti-Israel.
Well, I think certainly if I ever see any evidence of somebody who is anti-Semitic, I will challenge them strongly. There is no place for that. We know the consequences of anti-Semitism, and I will never allow that kind of talk or language in a parliament that I'm part of, certainly while I'm in government. And so people should not confuse criticism of Israel in terms of how they are responding to a problem or a policy initiative that they are taking with being in any way anti-Semitic, because they are two entirely separate issues.
In your conversation, in your meeting with Mr. Netanyahu, will you try to correct, to repair the relations between our two countries?
Well, I mean, I do that every time we meet. This will be the fourth time that I will meet your Prime Minister. I think we have very frank discussions every time we meet. The last time I was in Israel, it was a very good meeting, actually. We focused on Gaza, primarily, on how we could prevent a new cycle of violence reoccurring, which unfortunately has happened since then. As you would expect, the Israeli Prime Minister was very focused on security, as he always is, very focused on the safety of Israelis and of Israel as a state, as he always is. And I respect that. But it is also, I think, an obligation for me to challenge him on some of the policies that we believe are not working.
Will you support the bill which will prohibit the import of goods from the settlements from the West Bank?
I have explained to the sponsor of that bill that I don't believe that we can support that.
You don't support this bill?
No, I'm not supporting it because, well, first of all, trade policy is the competence of the European Union as a collective, it's not something that Ireland on its own can do. So I don't think that this legislation is going to be passed. It won't be. But I think it's a reflection of the frustration that I outlined to you earlier in relation to Ireland not being able to understand, Irish people not being able to understand settlement policy from the Israeli government. How can you, on the one hand, talk about a two-state solution at some stage in the future based on the West Bank being part of a future Palestinian state, and at the same time look to pour concrete on the very land that may be somebody else's state in the future, to expand settlements and to increase the population of Israelis in the West Bank, which will make that solution even more difficult. And many people want to try and make that point to Israel.
Well, I must congratulate you about the decision in Ireland on the question of abortion.
Ireland has been trying to solve the abortion issue for many, many years now by simply sending our women to Britain. And it's British abortion law, really, that has been applying to Irish women. I don't believe that's honest, and I don't believe it's okay any longer. And I'm glad to say that the Irish people agree with me. They have voted to change, and we will now introduce legislation which will protect women in a much more comprehensive way when they are in crisis pregnancy, but also will ensure that our responsibilities towards the unborn are still a big part of our legislation. And getting that balance right is something we'll work on over the next 6 months or so.
I thank you very much, Minister Covene. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.